I see you trying so hard to make them see your worth. Maybe you're pouring all your energy into texts, calls, desperately hoping to keep them close. But have you ever asked yourself if this is working? The harsh truth is, the more you try to prove yourself, the more predictable you become and the less value they see in you. Instead of pulling them closer, you're handing them the power to control your emotions while you lose control of your own. If you're chasing someone new, constantly being available and initiating every conversation only makes you seem too easy to get. If it's a relationship you've already built and they've started to pull away, you think explaining, checking in, or trying harder will fix things. But let's be honest, has it ever worked? The answer is no. It's not your words that will make them see your value. It's your silence. Think about this. You stop texting, stop explaining, stop trying. You let your silence do the work. At first, it might confuse them, but soon they'll start wondering, why aren't you reacting? Why aren't you chasing anymore? Your silence shatters their ego because, for the first time, they're no longer in control. Silence, my friend, is your greatest weapon. It forces them to reflect, to question why you're no longer there, and it shifts the entire dynamic. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, silence is safer than speech. When you stop talking, you stop giving them power over you. You reclaim control, allowing them to feel the weight of your absence. That's when they begin to realize your worth, not when you're constantly explaining, reassuring, or chasing their attention. Here's my challenge to you. Stop explaining. Stop chasing. Stop talking. Let them sit in that silence. Let them feel the shift. If you're ready to stop feeding their ego with your words, hit the like button now and comment below with the phrase, "Silence is power," to affirm your commitment to reclaiming your strength. But is silence alone enough? Honestly, no. No wise person simply sits in silence and waits for others to realize their worth. That's not how it works. You can't just sit back and hope they'll come running. Whether you're trying to attract someone new or repair a fading connection, silence must be used strategically to speak louder than any words ever could. In this video, we're diving into how to use silence as a powerful tool. This isn't about playing games or using passive-aggressive tactics. It's about embracing silence with confidence and purpose. We'll explore how to do this effectively by applying 7 timeless Stoic principles. These lessons aren't just about staying silent. They're about knowing when and how to be silent, so your presence is felt in a way they can't ignore. Trust me, this video will change the way you approach relationships. These Stoic principles won't just help them recognize your value, they'll also elevate your sense of self. You'll learn how intentional silence can completely shift the power dynamic and put you back in control. So, if you're ready to stop chasing and start attracting, hit the like button right now. If you're ready to stop feeding their ego with your words, and comment below, "Silence is power," and prepare to completely transform your perspective. Stay tuned until the end, because that's where the real power lies. Number 1. Silence after rejection or disinterest. Let's dive into the first Stoic lesson. Silence after rejection or sensing disinterest. This is perhaps one of the hardest lessons to embrace, yet one of the most powerful. Think about it. When you feel rejected or notice someone losing interest, what's your instinct? For most of us, it's to act immediately. You want to fix things, explain yourself, or worse, try harder to win them back. But here's the truth. Every word you speak, every action you take to change their mind serves one purpose: feeding their ego. And in doing so, you're lowering your own value. I used to believe that the only way to keep a relationship was by trying harder, by constantly proving that I was worth it. I was the one who texted first, started conversations, and tried to maintain the connection. Especially when I sensed the other person pulling away, I panicked, thinking that if I didn't act quickly, everything would fall apart. But I was wrong. And I had to learn this lesson the hard way. There was a time when I was talking to someone I really cared about. Things were great at first. We texted every day, shared everything from little stories to big plans for the future. But then, somewhere along the way, things started to change. Their messages became shorter, their responses slower, and the enthusiasm seemed to fade. I felt like I was losing them, and it made me panic. I started doing what so many of us do, texting more, looking for reasons to keep the conversation going, trying to pull them closer. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, they'd see my worth. But instead, every message I sent only left me feeling more powerless. They responded less, their replies became even more distant, and eventually they stopped altogether. At that point, I felt abandoned, like all my efforts had been meaningless. Worse, I felt like I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy. But in that painful moment, I realized something important. All my over-effort not only failed to keep them, but it also made me lose myself. I had allowed their attention and validation to dictate my value. I had fed their ego while shrinking my own. From that moment, I decided to try something I'd never dared to before. I stayed silent. No texts, no calls, no attempts to explain. I stepped back. At first, the silence felt like defeat. I worried they might think I didn't care anymore or misinterpret my silence as indifference. But then, I realized that silence wasn't about giving up. It was about reclaiming my self-respect. In that silence, something remarkable happened. I began to feel lighter, no longer consumed by the need to text or find reasons to stay connected. I had space to reflect on myself. I remembered that my worth wasn't determined by how someone else treated me. And I realized that if someone truly cared, they would feel my silence. They would start to wonder why I wasn't trying anymore, why I wasn't explaining myself, why I wasn't chasing them. For them, my silence became a powerful reminder. I was no longer playing their game. And sure enough, one day, they reached out. This time, not with the cold indifference of before, but with curiosity. They asked how I was, why I had gone silent, and if I was okay. But this time I didn't rush to respond. I understood that my silence had shifted the dynamic. I was no longer the one chasing. I was standing firm in my own value. Here's the lesson I learned. When faced with rejection or disinterest, silence is your most powerful tool. It doesn't just help you regain control, it protects your dignity and self-worth. It gives you the time to remind yourself that your value doesn't depend on someone else's validation. If they care, they will come back. But even if they don't, you still win, because you've chosen to honor yourself. So the next time you feel rejected or sense someone pulling away, remember this. Don't text, don't call, don't explain. Let your silence speak. Let them feel your absence. And most importantly, let yourself feel the strength of not needing anyone else to feel whole. Let's talk about letting silence speak when they're expecting a reaction. This is one of the most powerful moves you can make in a relationship. Let me share a personal story, a moment when I learned this lesson in the most profound way. A few years ago, I was in a relationship full of tension. We argued a lot, often over trivial things, but each argument seemed to escalate more than the last. One day during a particularly heated exchange, my partner said something deliberately hurtful, words clearly meant to provoke me, to make me lose control. It cut deep, and every instinct in me screamed to fight back, to defend myself, to retaliate. to shout, but in that moment, I paused. I could feel the anger rising within me, but instead of giving in, I chose silence. I took a deep breath, met their gaze, and said nothing. At first, that silence felt unbearable. I feared they'd see it as weakness, as me backing down. But something unexpected happened. My silence unsettled them. They seemed thrown off, unsure of how to respond because they were expecting a reaction, a fight they could control. In that silence, I realized I wasn't just staying calm. I was reclaiming my power. They started to speak slower, backtrack their words, and eventually acknowledged that they had crossed a line. The argument lost its fire. That silence not only diffused the situation, but also gave me the space to think clearly instead of reacting impulsively. Why is silence so powerful? Because people are wired to expect reactions. When someone provokes you, they want to see you get emotional, to confirm that they have power over you. But when you remain silent, you strip them of that power. You show them that you are in control of your emotions, not them. That silent response sends a message stronger than any words ever could. I will not let you manipulate me. Here's the thing. Stoicism teaches us that mastering your reactions is the ultimate form of strength. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In that moment, when I chose silence, I lived out this principle. I didn't let the situation dictate my behavior. Instead, I consciously decided how to respond in a way that upheld my dignity. I won't pretend that staying silent is easy. At first, I wanted so badly to say something, to defend myself, to prove I wasn't weak. But I asked myself, would saying anything actually improve the situation, or would it just drag me deeper into the argument? Silence wasn't surrender, it was self-respect. Imagine this. You're in the middle of an argument with your partner. They say something hurtful, clearly aimed at triggering you. Instead of snapping back, you take a deep breath and stay silent. What happens? Your silence confuses them. They start questioning themselves. They reflect on their own behavior, perhaps even realizing they've overstepped. Your silence is not just a refusal to engage. It's a mirror, forcing them to confront their own actions. This isn't about punishing the other person. It's about protecting yourself. Silence gives you the space to remember that your worth doesn't depend on how someone else treats you or what they think of you. Silence allows you to maintain your composure, your integrity, and your self-respect. It gives you the opportunity to remind yourself that you are not defined by someone else's words or actions. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, consider the power of silence. Let them feel the weight of your absence in the conversation. Let them sit with their own discomfort, their own behavior, while you stand firm in your strength. Remember, you don't need to say anything to prove your worth. That worth has always been within you, and your silence is the strongest way to affirm it. Number 3, use silence to make them miss you. Let's talk about how to use silence to make them miss you. One of the most powerful tools in any relationship. I'm not speaking from theory alone. This is a lesson I learned from my own experience. It wasn't an easy lesson, but it completely changed the way I see myself and navigate relationships. I was once in a passionate relationship, and everything started out wonderfully. We texted every day, shared small stories, and even planned for the future. But over time, I noticed a subtle shift. Their messages became shorter, their replies slower, and I felt like I was talking to a wall. That realization filled me with anxiety. My mind raced with questions like, what did I do wrong? In an attempt to fix things, I started trying harder. I sent more messages, initiated more conversations, and even suggested meeting up more often. But my increased effort was met with growing indifference. I vividly remember the moment I realized what I was doing. One evening, after sending a heartfelt, lengthy message and receiving no response, I sat there feeling utterly defeated. It felt as if I had lost a part of myself, my dignity, my confidence, and most importantly, my peace of mind. At that moment, I understood that the harder I tried to chase them, the more I was losing my own value. I decided to try something entirely new. Silence. No texts, no calls, no attempts to explain or pull them back. At first, this silence felt unbearable. I had an overwhelming urge to grab my phone and type out a message to explain my feelings. But I reminded myself, if they truly cared, they would notice my silence and question why I'd changed. And then something unexpected happened. At first, nothing changed. But as the days went by, I began to feel lighter. I was no longer consumed by the need to stay connected. I had time to reflect on myself. I realized that my happiness shouldn't depend on how someone else reacted to me. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth to someone unwilling to see it. And the most surprising thing, my silence seemed to have an effect. A week later, they messaged me asking how I was doing and why I hadn't been in touch. I didn't respond right away, not out of spite or to play games, but because I wanted to honor the sense of self-control I had rediscovered. I realized that my silence had not only shifted the dynamics of the relationship, but had also shown me the value of reclaiming my dignity and self-respect. Here's the lesson I learned. When you are always available, always present, you make others take your presence for granted. But when you pull back, when you let silence fill the space you once occupied, they can't help but notice the difference. They start to ask themselves, why aren't you chasing them anymore? Why aren't you reaching out? And in that silence, they begin to see your worth. Imagine this. Instead of always being the one to start conversations, you stop. Instead of sending yet another text to maintain the connection, you choose silence. At first, they may not notice, but gradually, they'll feel the void. They'll start to wonder why you're no longer reaching out, what you're doing, and whether they've lost something important. Silence doesn't just make them miss you, it reaffirms your value. When you're always present, it sends a signal that your time and attention are easily accessible. But when you pull back, you show that your presence is something to be earned and appreciated. That's when the balance of power begins to shift. Remember, silence isn't passive. It's an intentional act of strength. It's a way to assert that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone. Your worth isn't defined by how others perceive you. It's defined by how you perceive yourself. So the next time you feel the urge to do something to win back someone's attention, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Let silence speak for you. Let them feel your absence. And most importantly, let yourself feel the freedom and strength that come from standing firm in your own value. Let's talk about using silence to set boundaries, something I learned firsthand, and it completely changed the way I handle relationships. I used to be the kind of person who always tried to please everyone. Whenever someone asked me for something, even if I felt uncomfortable, I would always explain myself, give reasons, or even compromise just to avoid upsetting them. But the result? I felt drained, overburdened, and sometimes even taken advantage of. There was a time when a close friend of mine asked for my help with a personal project. At first, I was happy to lend a hand, but gradually their requests started to escalate, taking up more of my time, energy, and even pushing me into tasks I didn't feel comfortable doing. I tried to explain that I had my own commitments and felt overwhelmed, but they always managed to convince me that my help was indispensable. Every time I said no, I found myself stuck in a cycle of explaining, justifying, and feeling guilty. It left me emotionally exhausted, and the friendship started to feel more like a burden than a source of joy. Then, one day, I decided to try something different. The next time they asked for something beyond what I could give, I simply said, "I can't do that." No explanations, no justifications, just a clear and firm response. And then I stayed silent. At first, the silence felt excruciating. My mind raced with questions. Would they think I was selfish? Would this ruin our friendship? But instead of reacting or overthinking, I waited. Something remarkable happened. Instead of arguing or trying to persuade me like they usually did, they paused for a moment and then said, "I understand. Thank you for being honest." That moment was a revelation. I realized that my silence after setting the boundary didn't just protect me from unnecessary stress, it also made them respect my decision more. If I had continued to explain or justify, they might have seen my boundary as negotiable. But my silence made it clear I was serious, and there was no room for debate. That silence didn't just reinforce my stance, it gave them space to reflect on their own behavior. They may have realized they were asking too much, or that my help wasn't something they could always take for granted. Most importantly, I felt liberated from the constant pressure to make everyone happy. For the first time, I understood that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary for my mental and emotional health. Using silence to set boundaries isn't just a communication strategy. It's a statement of self-respect and emotional maturity. Instead of trying to convince others that your boundary is valid, you simply state it and let the silence speak for itself. This doesn't just protect you from feeling overwhelmed. It also helps the other person clearly understand where you stand. For me, this lesson transformed how I interact with people. I no longer feel the need to apologize for not meeting every demand. I no longer worry that saying no will damage my relationships. Surprisingly, my relationships have actually become healthier. The people who truly respect me also respect my boundaries. So the next time you need to set a boundary, remember this. You don't need to over-explain. State it firmly, clearly, and then let the silence do the talking. That silence not only reinforces your decision, but also sends a powerful message that you value yourself and expect others to do the same. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but that silence is an act of inner strength, a way to protect your dignity and maintain your peace of mind. Number 5. Silence as a tool of mystery. Silence is one of the most powerful tools when it comes to creating mystery in a relationship. People are naturally drawn to what they don't fully understand, and silence is the perfect way to cultivate that sense of intrigue. When you use silence as a tool to create mystery, you're not just withholding words. You're creating an air of unpredictability that makes them want to discover more about you. I didn't fully understand the power of silence until personal experience taught me an unforgettable lesson. In a past relationship, I used to believe that complete openness was the key to building a strong connection. So, I shared everything about myself, from the smallest details of my day to my grandest dreams for the future. I wanted them to truly know me, to deepen the bond between us. But over time, I began to notice a shift. Their excitement waned, their curiosity dwindled. I felt like I had become a book they had finished reading, with nothing left to uncover. At first, I thought maybe I hadn't shared enough or hadn't shared in the right way. So I tried harder, filling every silence with more stories and explanations. But that only made things worse. They seemed even less interested, and I started to realize that my excessive openness had inadvertently stripped away the mystery that makes a person intriguing. One day, exhausted from always being the one to keep the spark alive, I decided to change. I chose silence. Not the kind of silence born from indifference or coldness, but a deliberate, thoughtful silence. I stopped sharing everything so quickly, stopped trying to lay out every thought and feeling. Instead, I held back some things, letting them discover parts of me only if they truly wanted to. And something incredible happened. My silence created a space that hadn't existed before. They started asking questions, expressing curiosity about the things I hadn't said. Our conversations became more engaging because they felt like there was something they needed to uncover. They wanted to know more, to understand more, and that rekindled the excitement that had been missing. I realized that when you use silence correctly, you're not just creating mystery, you're re-establishing your own value. Silence doesn't just pique their curiosity, it also allows you to maintain control in the relationship. You don't need to share everything all at once, and that restraint makes you more captivating. Think about it. What makes us curious about someone? It's not those who overshare, but those who keep a little bit to themselves, those who leave room for discovery. I clearly remember one instance when they asked me about my future plans. Instead of providing a detailed response as I used to, I simply smiled and said, "There's a lot I'm not ready to share yet." They looked at me with genuine curiosity, and I could feel the shift in their demeanor. It was the first time they realized I wasn't an open book anymore, and that realization made them even more eager to know more. Silence isn't just about keeping parts of yourself private. It's also about not always being readily available. In the past, I would reply instantly to their texts and calls. But when I started pulling back a little, not replying right away, not because I wanted to play mind games, but because I wanted to create space for myself, I noticed they began to value our interactions more. Every text or call became more meaningful because it was no longer something they could take for granted. In Stoic philosophy, we learn that self-control is key to maintaining inner peace. When you embrace silence, you not only protect yourself from unnecessary exposure, but you also uphold your sense of self-worth. You don't need to constantly explain or clarify everything. Silence can often be the most powerful response, because it shows that you are confident in your value without needing validation from others. So, if you're trying to capture someone's attention or reignite the spark in a relationship, try what I did. Don't rush to share everything. Let silence speak for your worth. Let them wonder. Let them search. And let them feel the difference your absence creates. And in that silence, you'll discover a strength in yourself that's more powerful than you ever realized. Number 6. Use silence to break patterns. Silence can be one of the most powerful tools for breaking old patterns in relationships, a method often underestimated but incredibly effective. In any relationship, whether new or long-term, we often fall into repetitive cycles of behavior and reaction. These might include endless arguments, emotional outbursts, or even the ways we communicate with each other daily. When a relationship gets stuck in such patterns, it becomes stagnant and at times harmful to both parties. This is where silence comes into play, serving as a potent way to disrupt these cycles and renew the energy between you and the other person. Imagine being in a relationship where every disagreement leads to the same argument. Perhaps they criticize something, and your immediate instinct is to defend yourself. Or maybe you're the one who always apologizes and tries to diffuse the situation, even when it's not your fault. Both of you know exactly how these moments will unfold, and it leaves you both feeling drained and resentful. This repetition becomes toxic, and every time you react in the same way, you unknowingly reinforce the cycle. But what if you tried something different? What if instead of reacting immediately, you chose to remain silent? In Stoic philosophy, one of the most vital teachings is mastering your own reactions. By refusing to react in the way they expect, you immediately disrupt the cycle. If they're accustomed to you becoming defensive or escalating the argument, your silence will catch them off guard. It forces them to pause, to question the familiar pattern, and more often than not, it halts the argument before it even begins. In these moments, silence becomes a tool of control, not to manipulate, to protect your peace and prevent the situation from worsening. When you choose silence, you're not avoiding the issue, you're creating space. Space to let things cool down, to reflect, and to prevent the conversation from spiraling into something destructive. By staying silent instead of reacting, you force the other person to face their behavior without your emotional involvement. They no longer have your response to fuel the argument, and more often than not, they're left to confront their actions without the usual back and forth. Silence can also shift patterns in daily communication. If you're always the one initiating conversations, maintaining the flow of dialogue, or serving as the emotional anchor, it can create an unhealthy imbalance. When you step back and let silence fill the space, you compel the other person to step forward and meet you halfway. They begin to notice when you're not carrying all the weight, and this can alter the relationship dynamic toward greater equality and mutual effort. Using silence to break patterns isn't about avoiding communication or ignoring problems. It's about stepping back to interrupt unhealthy cycles and allowing both parties the opportunity to reflect. The tension created by silence isn't necessarily negative. In fact, it can be constructive. Silence interrupts habitual responses and opens the door to new ways of interacting. So, the next time you find yourself stuck in a toxic loop or caught in a heated argument, try something different. Use silence as a tool to break the pattern, create space for reflection, and regain control over your emotional responses. Silence can act as a reset button, helping a relationship break free from conflict or imbalance and move toward a place of peace and understanding. Let's explore the power of silence in emotional control, one of the most powerful tools you can develop in any relationship. Emotional control is the cornerstone of Stoic philosophy and is what distinguishes those who react impulsively from those who command respect in relationships. Those who can master their emotions, remain calm and composed even in chaotic situations, hold an incredible amount of power. Imagine being in a tense situation. Perhaps your partner or someone close to you has said something hurtful or provocative, something that triggers an immediate emotional reaction. Most people, when faced with such emotional pressure, respond instantly. They lash out, defend themselves, or try to win the argument. But this reaction is precisely what the other person expects, and by doing so, you hand over control of your emotions to them. Reacting impulsively means relinquishing your emotional power. Now consider a different approach. You choose silence. You don't react, don't rush to defend yourself or argue back. Instead, you take a deep breath and let the moment pass without saying a word. This silence reflects your emotional control. It shows that you're not easily provoked, that you don't let your emotions govern you, and that you can maintain composure even in challenging moments. This silence sends a powerful message. You are unshakable. When you master emotional control through silence, you create an environment where others can no longer manipulate or dominate the situation. The other person is left to sit with their own emotions, and without your reactions to fuel the fire, they are forced to confront their own behavior. Silence in this context is not about avoiding issues. It's about preserving your strength and refusing to let the situation dictate your actions. One of the key lessons of Stoic philosophy is that we are responsible only for our own actions and reactions, not those of others. As Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. This is the essence of emotional control through silence. You're not trying to control the other person. Instead, you're controlling how you respond to them. In relationships, this level of control is incredibly attractive because it demonstrates confidence and self-respect. When you refuse to react to provocations and hold your ground in silence, it forces the other person to realize they don't have the power to upset you. This can be unsettling, especially if they're used to provoking emotional responses from others. At the same time, this sets a clear boundary. You will not be drawn into emotional games, and you will not allow anyone to control how you feel. Silence also gives you time to think. Instead of reacting impulsively, you can reflect on the situation and carefully choose your next step. You can assess whether the issue is worth addressing or if silence is the best response. This calm, measured approach keeps you in control of your emotions and, by extension, the dynamics of the relationship. Ultimately, silence in emotional control doesn't mean avoiding or shutting down communication. It shows that you are in charge of your emotional state and that no one can provoke a reaction unless you allow it. This kind of control is deeply attractive because it conveys maturity, strength, and stability, qualities essential for building strong, healthy relationships. The next time you feel the urge to respond emotionally, remember this. Silence can be your greatest ally. It's not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate display of strength and emotional mastery. Silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a powerful tool that can shift the dynamics of any relationship. Whether you're trying to attract someone new or regain control in a distant relationship, mastering silence allows you to exude strength, mystery, and emotional control. Stop reacting impulsively and start using silence strategically to elevate your presence and value. If you're ready to reclaim your power and stop being just an option, drop a comment below with the words, "Silence is power." This is your first step toward becoming the most powerful version of yourself. If this video resonated with you, hit the like button and share it with your friends or anyone who might need to hear this message. Your small actions can make a big difference for someone searching for strength and freedom. And don't forget to hit subscribe to support this channel and help these messages reach even more people. I truly appreciate your support. Remember, from this moment forward, you hold the power to control your life. See you in the next video. If you are new here, please like the video and subscribe. Statistics show that only 15% of my audience is subscribed to the channel. So if this content has helped you in any way, I ask you to subscribe and hit the notification bell.